Well, it's really good to be here tonight. I guess they put my slides up, or do I just do a talk? I don't have to have my slides. You know, wasn't sure what they wanted me to do, but maybe I'll show a few slides. We're not going to make it very long. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of early intervention. I got that. And I want to just straighten out one thing that was a little different than what the movie showed. That the doctor in there in the movie, that happened a little later. One of the things that saved it for me was when I was 2.5 years old. I went in and saw Bronson Crothers at Boston Children's Hospital, and she was a neurologist. And she checked me out for epilepsy and for deafness. And then she referred my mother to a little speech therapy school. 2 teachers taught out of their basement. And they were very good teachers. They just sort of know exactly how to work with these kids. They kind of just know how hard to push. Then when I was 3, she hired a nanny who just spent doing constant turn-taking games with me and my sister. We've got to teach these kids to take turns. Another thing, being a child of the 50s, table manners were just pounded in. I'm seeing too many smart kids on the spectrum. They don't know how to shop. They don't know how to get up in the morning. When I was very young, like in 1st grade, I got an alarm clock. I was expected to set it and use it. There were some expectations for behavior. You know, a little temper tantrum, that's what it was called in the 50s in church. That just wasn't okay. But we have to think about the sensory issues, because fortunately they didn't play hard rock music in our church, because if they had, I would have had a problem with that. And I'm really glad to see that you know, the center here is looking at the sensory issues. I see you had the steamroller out there. That's a device. It's a simpler kind of version of the squeeze machine, and it doesn't cost as much as the squeeze machine, but it does some of the same things. And people ask me, I don't want to try it. Well, I'm afraid I'll end up with some, you know, really ridiculous picture on the internet, so probably don't really want to try it. But, you know, sensory issues, there's a lot of places that overlook sensory issues. You know, you can have a situation where maybe the child can't tolerate the shopping mall because there's just too much noise there. When I was a little kid, loud sounds hurt my ears. I couldn't stand to be hugged. It was like a tidal wave of stimulation washing over me. Now, the thing about these sensory issues is they're very variable. One child may hate running water. Another child may like to play with running water. But the high-pitched sounds tend to be the worst. One kid's going to respond well to deep pressure to calm them down. Another kid's not going to respond to it. It's real variable. But these sensory problems are real. Well, Dr. Bronson Crothers tested my hearing, and my auditory threshold was normal. But that tells you absolutely nothing about auditory detail. That's the ability to hear the hard consonant sounds. If everybody talked to me very slowly, directly to me, I could understand. But when the grown-ups went fast, then it just all went into gibberish. And then there's some kids, and I don't have this problem, where hearing fades in and out like a bad mobile phone connection. Another big problem is attention shifting slowness. It takes a much longer time to shift back and forth between 2 different things. This is some work that was done by Ami Klin at Yale, and they showed people on the spectrum, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? I don't know, boring social movie. I fall asleep on a plane going to that one, you know. But when they showed The Day the Earth Stood Still and my TV was broken, I made sure I found a seat where it had one that worked, because that's sort of more my speed. But the yellow line's looking at the eyes, but the thing that's important to me in this picture is look at how many times the yellow line looks back and forth compared to the red line. Attention shifting slowness. This shows it absolutely perfectly. Now, the paper didn't even say anything about that. But, you know, social stuff, how are you going to be social when attention shifting is slow? You know, and there's other people on the spectrum, and I'm not one of them, where images kind of break up into like a mosaic. I don't have this problem. These kids are going to be auditory thinkers. Now, how do you know if the kid's got something wrong with the visual system? Now, it's back here in the back third of the brain. These are the kids that hate escalators. These are the kids that can't stand fluorescent lights. I had a dyslexic student years ago that had this problem. And fluorescent lights, it was like living in a discotheque. It was terrible for her. And you go in and you test the eyes, and the eyes can be more or less normal. It's not in the eyeball. It's back here in the visual cortex. You know, there's a number of students where when they go to read, the print jiggles on the page, especially when it's white paper with black print. I've found that this is real common. I teach a class in livestock handling. My students have to lay out circular designs, and I'm finding 1 or 2 of these every semester in class. I can tell by the way they do the drawings, they cannot draw the circles. They cannot, like, draw a line and just make 3 half circles like this. They just can't do that. So what are some of the simple things you can do? You know, it'd be stupid for a child to flunk out of school because you didn't give them a laptop computer, because a TV-type computer flickers, or get him away from the fluorescent lights, get his desk over by the window. And there's been kids that have been helped by colored lenses. There was one lady here in Colorado, her 6-year-old could tolerate 5 minutes at the local Walmart. She tried on some different colored glasses, and she can now do an hour of Walmart. You know, why does that intervention work? Well, it has something to do with these circuits back here that handle shape, color, motion, and texture, and those circuits have to work together. Something's wrong with that. If you can figure that out today, that's the binding problem in vision research. But for some people, you get the right colored glasses, and it fixes the problem. I don't know why it works, but it does. And then some people say, well, that's just rubbish. Well, the problem is, if you had 10 kids with autism, this may only help 1 or 2. You see, this is the problem with the sensory things. It's so variable. Out of 10 kids with autism, maybe you know, 1 is a pressure responder and is really going to respond to that steamroller device. And then you're going to have maybe 2 that hate it. You know, this is the variability issue. You know, and then you have a child that remains nonverbal, and oftentimes they're absolutely can't screen out the background noise. I know people that are verbal that are monochannel. They can't see and hear at the same time. You know, these are real things. Scientists have learned a lot about the brain. And if you want to look up some of the brain research, you can go on the PubMed database, P-U-B-M-E-D, and look it up. There's a lot of things that are known. You know, when they just say they don't know how it works, there's things that have been learned. And one of the things is the back part of the brain gets used a whole lot more. Word-based tasks tend to be processed in the back part of the brain, and the frontal cortex, that's the brain's executive function, that gets used a whole lot less. You see, when you hear a word, you see a word, you speak a word, or you think about a word, see how different parts of the brain are turned on? Well, you've got to have inter-office communications. See, the brain's got 2 kinds of matter. You've got gray matter, that's sort of the brain's integrated circuits. You know, each part of the brain kind of has a different function. And then the whole middle part of the brain is white matter. It connects everything to everything else. And it's in these inter-office connections between different parts of the brain where you have the problems. And I'm a visual thinker. So to understand sort of the concept of how the brain is made, I have to relate it to something I can visualize, like an office building. You see, and this is how I think, you know, thinking in pictures. The movie did a great job of showing how I think. You got the president up there on the top of the office tower. He's the chief executive. Then you got the division vice presidents. That's the language part. And then down below that, you've got things like, the good geek stuff, like mathematics, computer programming, engineering department, visual thinking. And one of the things I'm getting very concerned about today is I'm seeing too many smart, geeky kids that kind of are going nowhere. First of all, they didn't have some basic social rules pounded in. Another thing that really helped me, and this was shown beautifully in the movie, was my science teacher. Because now I had a goal. Now I had a reason to study. Where before I wasn't studying because I didn't have any reason to study. But now I wanted to become a scientist. This sort of is the inter-office communications in the brain. And, you know, different disorders, you're going to get different variations in where some of these connections are disrupted. But we could call this brain airlines. And on the East Coast, we cancel a pile of flights on the East Coast. You know, but then out there in geek land out on the West Coast, and you get on the higher end of the spectrum, you may have extra flights. You know, us geeks out there on the West Coast could care less about the stupid suits up in the office. We're just going to give them one dial-up. That's all they need. Now, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of developing strengths. One of the problems you have in autism, and plus some other disorders too, is uneven skills. Oftentimes there's a tendency to be good at one thing and bad at something else. And too often there's too much emphasis on the disability and not enough emphasis on building up the area of strength. And this is a picture that a 9-year-old drew in perspective. And around 3rd or 4th grade, that's when my art ability really started to show up. You don't usually see it at 4 or 5, but around 3rd or 4th grade, you'll see it. And my mother really, really encouraged my art. And she also encouraged me to do art of different things. Okay, I used to like to draw horses all the time. Well, let's do a picture of where the horse is ridden to. Let's do a picture of the horse's stable. In other words, take that thing the kid's fixated on, broaden it out. If he likes airplanes, let's use airplanes to teach math, airplanes to teach reading. Let's read about a place where an airplane flies. Teach reading. Let's read about a place where an airplane flies to. See, what you're doing there is getting an associative link back to his favorite thing, airplanes. Now, my mind works just like Google for images. You know, you type in keywords, you get all these pictures. I'm kind of amazed at how the search engine works. Works exactly like my mind. And being a visual thinker really helped me in my work with equipment because I could test run equipment in my mind. I thought everybody could test run equipment in their mind. In fact, all the cattle over at Greeley plant and the cattle over at the Fort Morgan plant go through equipment that I designed. I think that's pretty good for somebody who thought was mentally retarded. And the thing that was really interesting is that the doctor that helped me in the beginning was a neurologist, and Dr. Bronson Crothers really was kind of ahead of her time to even think about looking at epilepsy. You know, this was back in 1949, and then the people that wanted to put me in an institution, that happened a little bit later. The movie had to just sort of stick that composite character in there because it just, you know, it's a 2-hour movie. And the main thing we wanted to be showing was teenage years and getting my business started. There's the dip vat that they built for the movie. This is the geek side of me. Loved the fact all my projects were done right. I actually did build that gate you could open from the car. The optical illusion room, I did that project. Built the squeeze machine. Everything was made off original drawings and photos. And being a geek, that really, really turned me on. And I get concerned. You take some of these smart kind of geeky kids kind of getting a handicap mentality. They aren't made to do enough stuff. I mean, I talked to a mom the other day, and her 12-year-old who's fully verbal doesn't know how to order food at McDonald's. Now, that's just ridiculous because these things were being done for him. And there are the drawings. Now, one of the things that I had to learn is I had to sell my work, not myself. Everybody thought it was really weird. But when I whipped out these drawings and I showed them, then I got a little bit of respect. And I like to show that job to people because I like to fantasize that 2,000 years from now it's going to get dug up and they're going to wonder what it's for. And this is a neat picture I got from a young autistic kid to show how he puts pictures into categories. You see, how do you form a concept when I just got all these specific pictures floating around in my mind? I form a concept by putting pictures into categories. It's bottom-up thinking, it's not top-down. Everything you teach the kid has to be by specific example. Okay, what's good table manners? Eating with your mouth open is bad table manners. Twirling your fork in the air is bad table manners. You know, cutting your meat with a knife and fork is good table manners. Eating with your hands is bad table manners. You see, that's specific example. How do you teach a concept like being rude? Or how do you teach a concept like not running across the street? You got to teach them that that applies at home, at school, at the Joneses' house, at the Smith's house, at a whole lot of different places. It's bottom-up thinking, it's not top-down. That's a very important thing. Everything is taught by specific example, and specific examples get put in categories. Now, when I wrote my book, Thinking in Pictures, in the mid-90s, I realized my thinking was different when I asked people about church steeples. I was shocked to find out that most people see this generalized, generic image. That's coming out of the association cortex. We now know that in neuroscience. I just see specific ones, and they sort of just come up like this, just like it was shown in the movie. That's how they come up. Well, getting just about near the end of my slides, I used to joke around that I had a huge internet connection into my head for graphics. This is what's called tensor imaging. It measures great big huge trunk lines in the brain, and mine is twice as big as the controls. And there's one there. Boy, I got a big one there. You know, big, huge, high-speed internet connection. I had another brain scan recently at the University of Utah, and they found my graphics card, and it's really big. Okay, I'm going to end on this slide. And this is a really important slide. I'm going to end here. And I've kind of found over the years, there's kind of 3 different kinds of minds. And I talked in the TED conference about the different kinds of minds. I'm a photorealistic thinker. I think in pictures. I couldn't do algebra. And one of the mistakes made in my math education is I didn't get jumped to geometry and trig. So how did you get through college when I couldn't do algebra? Well, I got to thank the new math craze in the 60s. This saved me. Because college math in '67, when I took math, was finite math. Statistics, probability, and matrices. If it had been algebra, I would have flunked that. I think one of the things that needs to change is should be able to substitute geometry or trig for algebra. And I'm finding a lot of people where algebra is not the prerequisite. And then you have another kind of thinker, the pattern thinker. Think of more abstract, organic chemistry, mathematical things, chess, origami. And these are your music and math minds, your engineers. They often have trouble in reading. You see, there you get uneven skills. And then you have a verbal fact mind. This is the guy that knows every statistics about hockey or whatever, his favorite subject is, average abilities in math. And then you have some people with a lot of visual problems where they are an auditory thinker. They're going to learn better through auditory. I just want to give you a glimpse into the mind of the pattern thinker. And this praying mantis is made out of a single sheet of folded paper. No scotch tape, no cutting. And what you see there in the back, that's the folding pattern. That's not my mind, but I just wanted to show that to you. And we've got to figure out how to help kids excel. I mean, one of the problems you got in autism is it's such a big spectrum. At one end of the spectrum, you got Mark Zuckerman, and I can mention him by name. I read the book and I saw the movie. And if it shows him accurately, he's as Asperger as they could be. And you've got half of Silicon Valley out there. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got people that are going to, be a lot more handicapped. And this is the problem. Autism's a true continuum of traits. That's what the research shows. The genetics is totally embedded. You're not going to find the gene to get rid of autism. That's not going to happen. You're talking about tiny code variations inside of genes. In a little bit of the trait, you get a smart person who's not that social. Because after all, to do all the geek stuff, you got to give up some of the social circuits and vice versa. It's sort of like, when does geek become Asperger's? There's no black and white dividing line. And diagnosis is not precise anyway, because they're going to get rid of the Asperger's thing. And I have to say, I'm trained as a biologist, biological scientist, and I do have problems with people sitting in meeting rooms, discussing what the guidelines should be. Because, you don't do that for tuberculosis or for, what kind of flu virus you have or whatever. So I'm going to end there and just open it up for questions. I'd like to back up to that slide because I think that's a really, really important slide because, I'm a visual thinker, but I've had students who were good at everything I was bad at. And different kinds of minds can work together. And we need to help people to do that. We also need to be thinking about jobs. Visual thinkers like me, good at things like industrial design, art, graphics, photography, pattern thinkers, your mathematicians, word thinkers, journalists. We need to start when kids are in middle school and think, what are they going to do when they grow up? They're not learning any work skills. When I was 15 years old, I took care of 9 horses. When I was 13, Mother had me hand sewing dresses for a seamstress. When I was in college, I did a whole lot of internships. We're not learning enough, they're not learning enough work skills. I'm seeing smart kids graduating from college that can't get jobs. They have 0 work skills. We have got to correct that. Okay, now we'll do questions. And if nobody has any question, I'm going to pick somebody and then I'll repeat the question. Okay, right there, and I'll repeat the question. Well, in the general population, you can have these same kind of thinkers, but what tends to happen in autism is you tend to get a more unevenness of skill. Like in what they call a neurotypical person, you may have these different kinds of minds, but the skills are more even. What tends to happen in autism is to be, especially on the higher end of the spectrum, is to be very good at one thing and really horrible at something else. Like I absolutely cannot multitask. I gotta say, okay, I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna spend 2 hours working on writing this abstract or whatever, the thing is I have to do. Okay, this hour right now I'm gonna spend just doing phone calls. I don't want to be interrupted by the phone and the email all the time. I like to have, blocks of time where I can get things done. But yeah, the normal population is gonna have these minds, but what I find in autism is it tends to be more extreme. So that kid that's good at, you might have a 4th grader that needs to be taking 8th grade math, otherwise he's going to be bored to death, but needs some special ed in reading. The skills tend to be uneven. And that's shown up in a ton of research, going all the way back to research done in the 70s. Okay, right there. Okay, right there. Why children with autism don't like to be touched? There's something wrong in the nervous system that turns the volume control of the senses up. You know, when I was a little kid, certain loud noises, it just hurt. You know, being hugged, it was like too much stimulation. And there's still things about this that are not understood. My number one research priority in autism is sensory, because people with severe sensory, and they can be smart, even computer programmer people, can have sensory problems so bad that they can't tolerate a normal office. They're living in a dark house because of, you know, light sensitivity or sound sensitivity. And these sensory issues can be extremely debilitating. And a lot of these big, you know, rage attacks that sometimes happen due to sensory. This needs to be researched. And the other thing I'm just horrified is the amount of drugs they're giving out like candy. And as I travel around the country, I'm finding that certain regions of the country, it's just absolutely a medical wasteland. I take antidepressants. The movie showed me before I went on antidepressant medication, and I really did have to eat all that yogurt because I was getting ulcerative colitis. You know, and then I'd weaned myself off the yogurt back onto regular food. Took antidepressants in 1980, it stopped. You know, when meds work right, they really work, and I write about that in Thinking in Pictures, so I've got a whole chapter just on that. But I'm horrified at the amount of Risperdal that's been given out to 5-year-olds. You know, it's a massive, uncontrolled experiment. Don't get me started on the medical thing, and it's gotten worse. It's worse than it was 5 years ago. I travel all around the country. You know, and there's a place of medication, but, you know, needs to be a lot more conservative. Okay, there was another question.
Dr. Gray, if you could talk about the biggest break or the most positive event that happened to you in your industrial design career.
Industrial design career, well, very early on, you know, I was designing all those dip vats. And sometimes something happens that makes an opportunity. The scabies mite came into Arizona, and the feed yards in Arizona, this would have been early 70s, you know, like 75, and the feed yards now had to build all these dip vats. They were required by the USDA. I got to design 75% of them. Boy, it was just like instant work, you know, and I got one built that was really good. The other feed yards liked it, and the thing in the movie where they put the metal plate in there, that actually did happen, actually did drown those cattle. We did go back and get it fixed, and then when the other feed yards saw it was fixed, all the other feed yards had to have one too. That put my business on the map. And the cattle magazines actually did come in and see it. You know, that wasn't very nice for the cattle that happened. But in terms of getting my business going, it was a lucky break.
Temple, how has your visual thinking helped you in discovering animal behavior in these processes?
Well, animals don't think in language, so animals are going to be a sensory-based thinker. Think in pictures, think in sounds, think in smells, think in touch sensations. I tell people working with animals, you got to get away from language. You know, the movie really shows very nicely how my visual thinking works. The movie's very clinically accurate in terms of showing visual thinking, showing anxiety, and showing sensory problems. And you know, I've seen things where animals can get very specific fear memories. Like in my book, Animals in Translation, by the way, the bookstore is supposed to still be here afterwards. And there was a horse that got scared to death of black cowboy hats. Because when he was abused, he was looking right at a black cowboy hat. White hat's fine, but you see, a white hat's a different picture than a black hat. A man on a horse and a man on the ground. That's viewed as two totally different file folders for cattle. See, a man on the ground, man on the horse, different picture. A dog will have one set of behaviors on the leash, another set of behaviors off the leash. See, the brain actually does set up file folders and put pictures and smells and other things into it. And another thing that helped me in my work with animal behavior was when I figured out that other people didn't think the same way I did. And I kind of discovered that when I started asking people about the church steeples. See, now why church steeples? Because if I ask you house or car, most people visualize their own house or car. But I ask you something you don't own, but everybody has to see them. That's when I picked up the generalized image. Okay, research now knows where that generalized image is. It comes out of the association cortex of the brain rather than the primary picture files. Most people think out of the association cortex rather than I'm digging down all the way down to the primary files. So my concept of what a steeple is a whole bunch of pictures that come up like this, put them in the steeple folder. Then there's some other pictures that go in the cell phone tower folder, like weird fake silos, fake trays, plain old regular ugly cell phone towers.
Hi, Temple.
The fake windmill thing, they got that one on the way to the airport. The silo, the windmill, we don't have the fake tree. Okay, that's all. Okay, way there in the back.
Hi, Temple. How can nurses and other healthcare workers better advocate for their patients with autism?
One of the biggest problems, I think that's sort of a very generalized kind of question, but medical issues, medical procedures can be really scary. I hated getting shots. One thing is no surprises. The dentist can really be a big problem. We'll let the child go to the dentist when it's not busy and sit in the chair. Listen to some of the tools. Surprises cause panic. You don't want to spring a surprise on them. Doctor did that with me and say, look out the window, look at the pretty birdie, and whammo, I got a shot. And I was throwing a big one.
Temple?
Yep.
You've had a movie made of your life, and you've had a successful career. What's next for you in the next 2 to 5 years? What do you want to do?
Well, I've been doing nonstop speaking engagements, and when I have, like a mother comes up to me and says, well, my kid went to college or got a job because of, one of my lectures or one of my books, I think that's something of value. I've also served as an advisor to a number of graduate students. I've got 4 students that have gotten PhDs with me, and my 5th one's probably going to be graduating in December. And they've gone out and had good jobs. I work really hard to make sure my students get placed in good jobs. I actively go out and look for jobs for them. I think that's part of my job. I put, they got to have a good career, getting their career going. I put a lot of emphasis on all the job stuff. We're not thinking enough. What are they going to do when they grow up? And we need to start thinking about that in middle school. So you can start kind of a slow transition into learning some of the things for work. I probably for a while I've been doing a lot of speaking engagements. I'm still making sure I have time to do some of my professional things, like I'm an animal welfare auditor instructor. I have to, they have a class twice a year for that. I had to make sure that got on the calendar. I certainly plan to keep teaching my class at CSU and make sure I'm home on the Tuesday afternoons, for half of each semester to do my short course. I teach animal behavior in the veterinary college. These are all things I definitely plan to keep doing, because I think it's really important that I still do things with my career. People say, why don't you just work full-time on autism? Well, I still want to have a career and do cattle things that have nothing to do with autism, because this gets into identity. I'm seeing some young autistic kids getting so hung up on being autistic that that's become their fixation. Well, my fixation was all my, cattle stuff, and that's something that turned into a career. And it bothers me a little bit to see a 10-year-old come up to me at a conference and wants to tell me all about his autism. I'd rather have him tell me about his science project, or some poetry he wrote, or how he can play a musical instrument, or something like that. Something that he can turn into a career. I'm seeing too many of the smart, geeky kids on the high end of the spectrum that ought to be working in Silicon Valley, not going down the right route. And that really concerns me. My science teacher really got me turned around, but I'm also realizing that my 50s upbringing had a lot to do with it too, because some of the problems I'm seeing today, like not getting to work on time, I didn't have that problem. I had a lot of problems in college with the dorm. I got stuck in a room with 2 roommates. 3 girls in a room, that was horrible. Couldn't sleep, couldn't study. That's not going to work. But once I had decided that I was going to go to school and I was going to study, I got to class on time and I got my homework turned in. High school, oh, I took care of the horses, but I didn't care about studying. But I was learning some valuable work skills. You know what? I get to class on time and sit through it, but I got there on time. And I got my homework turned in. High school, oh, I took care of the horses, but I didn't care about studying. But I was learning some valuable work skills. You know what? I get to class on time and sit through it, but I got there on time.
Hi.
I can't emphasize enough the importance of good teachers, like my science teacher. He was responsible for getting me turned around, and I'm getting concerned today that we don't have enough of these good science teachers, you know, and these teachers that can really kind of mentor a kid. And you know where most of them are? They're over in the community college, because you don't have to have an education degree to teach chemistry at the community college, but you've got to have an education degree to teach it in high school. And there's tons of people, you know, that are retired or maybe laid off from work or something like that would love to teach a chemistry class or biology class or an English class. Yes, I think they need to have a degree in biology or English, that's for sure. You know, I think that's something that needs to be changed. I think there's a lot of talent out there that could be used to help turn some of these high school kids around. But most people that like to teach an English class don't want to take 2 years of ed courses. I know it's different in every state, and I don't know all the rules in all the different places.
Doctor, let me interrupt you real quick. We're going to do one final question, and then we're going to wrap things up. So go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, Temple. I'm going to college next year, and this is what I want to do when I get older. So I just want to know, for like my generation, the generations to come, what you think the next step should be to help everybody with autism and all kinds of developmental disorders.
Well, first of all, we got to look at whether we're doing it. Little kids. People always ask me, "What's the single most important thing you do?" Okay, little kids, it's early intervention. Well, not everyone's going to agree on that. Then we get into older kids. You see, I think everybody needs to be working to the best of their ability. Let's say if somebody remains nonverbal. Well, if he's worked with, he can do simple shopping, cooking, you know, daily living skills. If you don't do anything with him, he wouldn't even be able to dress himself. You know, what we got to do is get people to work up to their, you know, their true potential. Okay, I think I'll end on that, and I'll be around for a little bit.
Let's give one more round of applause to Dr. Temple Grandin, please.